Chapter 843, One Sword. The performance of Little Billy and the 3 bar guests surprised the Death Eaters, especially Rodolphus. He never expected anyone to survive such a relentless attack. What saved their lives were the magical protective shields they had. These shields were incredibly strong. After enduring 2 or 3 spells, they only showed surface cracks. Some even had 2 or 3 layers of protection. Rodolphus glanced at these protective shields, which were comparable to the full-body armor curse. He concluded that these 4 people couldn't have cast such powerful magic themselves. His attention shifted to the accessories they wore. Could these ordinary wizards afford such alchemical props? Rodolphus recognized the accessories immediately as powerful alchemical items. In his experience, such items were rare and precious. Since when could an ordinary wizard possess such things? This realization made Rodolphus feel disoriented and angry, like someone who had been out of touch with society for years and found himself completely out of place upon returning. "Die! Avada Kedavra!" Rodolphus shouted angrily, aiming his wand at Little Billy, who was closest. Death Eaters generally avoided using the unforgivable curses or other powerful dark magic in battle due to their high energy consumption and the toll they took on the caster's spirit. But Rodolphus was truly enraged. These insignificant characters, whom he could usually manipulate at will, now dared to defy him and had succeeded. This was unacceptable. Even though using the killing curse was draining, he had to act. The strength of those protective shields and the state of the Death Eaters meant another round of spells might not harm the opponents. The killing curse, which ignored magical protection, could re-establish the Death Eaters' dominance. On the opposite side, Little Billy and the others were terrified when Rodolphus cast the killing curse. They had been proud of buying the Silver Flash amulet for protection, but now they faced a deadly attack. They were not trained aurors and had no idea how to handle such a situation. Their minds went blank. At this critical moment, a silver electric light appeared out of thin air, intercepting the killing curse like a meteor and deflecting it. As the light faded, everyone saw a young wizard in a dark robe holding a silver, long sword. He had blocked Rodolphus' curse with his sword. Both the Death Eaters and Rodolphus were taken aback by the sudden appearance of this figure. The magic he displayed was bizarre and didn't resemble apparition. They all became cautious, ready to defend themselves against this new threat. "Mr. Wilson." Little Billy and the others recognized Anduin immediately and shouted excitedly. Umbridge, held hostage by Bellatrix, also widened her eyes in excitement. If she hadn't been cursed and unable to speak, she would have called for help despite her disdain for Anduin. Anduin, however, ignored Umbridge, focusing instead on the 4 behind him. "You guys evacuate to a safe place," he instructed firmly. "First, leave this place to me," Anduin instructed. The aurors patrolling nearby had already noticed the commotion and would soon come to support them. "Just maintain magical communication," he added. Anduin wasn't deceiving anyone with these words. He knew through his connections that the group of aurors, led by Scrimger, had already been informed about the situation. This was why Anduin had arrived so quickly. If the aurors arrived in time and used equipment like anti-apparition jammers, these Death Eaters would find it impossible to escape. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Wilson." Little Billy and the others felt relieved upon hearing this. Although they had tried to appear brave, they were actually terrified by Rodolphus's brutality. Escaping with their lives seemed like a great outcome. They quickly retreated through the hole they had just created. The Death Eaters in the room didn't stop them, sensing that the young wizard before them was formidable, someone who could easily deflect the killing curse. Rodolphus raised an eyebrow upon hearing Anduin's name and sneered. "Wilson? Are you that Anduin Wilson, the alchemist who claimed to have captured his master? Kill him! Kill this blasphemer!" Bella, standing beside Rodolphus, was much more agitated. Anything related to Voldemort excited her to the point of frenzy. Anduin ignored their taunts and provocations. His mind was focused on how to drive these people away as quickly as possible. A total of 19 people are present, besides Umbridge. Why is there one more? This is different from what the information shows, Anduin thought, glancing at the crowd. It doesn't matter. Time is running out. We have to drive them away immediately. When the Aurors arrive, none of these guys will be able to escape. In this case, let's be more ruthless. 19 people are too many, no matter how you look at it. In a flash, Anduin calculated how to deal with the Death Eaters and then charged forward with a cold expression and his sword ready. Rodolphus and the Death Eaters didn't expect Anduin to attack without a word. They were used to being the ones who initiated such actions. This Anduin wasn't from Dumbledore's camp. Why wasn't he following any rules? But there was no time to ponder. Faced with Anduin's sudden attack, the Death Eaters quickly launched a volley of spells. This time, they cast their spells with much more intensity. All kinds of dark magic, poisonous curses, and even killing curses were hurled at him. Anduin didn't slow down for a moment. Instead, he sped up, swinging his long sword at high speed to deflect and smash the curses one by one. His entire body was covered in silver lightning as he charged into the crowd. The distance between them was short, and Anduin closed the gap of more than 10 meters in the blink of an eye. The Death Eaters only had time to fire one round of spells. The Death Eaters were taken aback by Anduin's fighting style. They were used to dueling with wands from a distance, showing off their spellcasting skills. But here was a wizard rushing at them with a sword. The sheer audacity and intensity of Anduin's attack filled them with panic. Seeing a person covered in lightning rushing towards them, they couldn't help but scatter. They weren't fools. They knew better than to stand still in the face of such danger. Rodolphus, who was at the front, found himself in a precarious situation. Unlike the others, he had less time to react. However, he displayed the calmness of a seasoned fighter. Realizing he couldn't dodge, he decided to block the attack. Raising his wand, he conjured 5 layers of iron armor shields in front of him. Rodolphus felt a surge of pride. Despite being imprisoned in Azkaban for over a decade, his skills remained sharp. But his pride was short-lived. Anduin, facing Rodolphus, did not hesitate. With a swift horizontal slash of his silver sword, he shattered the 5-layered magic armor as if it were butter. Rodolphus barely had time to react before the sword was at his neck. In that moment, his thoughts were not of his long career as a Death Eater, or even of Voldemort, but of the cold gleam of the sword that had just grazed his neck. After dispatching Rodolphus with a single move, Anduin continued his assault, plunging into the crowd and targeting the Death Eaters. A flash of lightning seemed to streak through the air as he moved. When the onlookers regained their senses, they were horrified by the scene before them. Along the path Anduin had taken, 6 Death Eaters, including Rodolphus, lay dead in various gruesome states. Some were beheaded, others cut in half, and some had been slashed from neck to ribs. None of those near Anduin had survived intact. One Death Eater, unable to dodge in time, had his palm severed and fell to the ground, crying in agony. The brutal efficiency of Anduin's attack left the remaining Death Eaters terrified. They had not anticipated losing so many comrades in an instant, nor had they expected their leader, Rodolphus, to fall so easily. I recently returned from the hospital, and this time the treatment was much more effective. The source of the inflammation in my body was identified, but the strong medication and its side effects left me dizzy all day. However, I should be back to normal soon. Everyone, please take care of your health. Don't let a common cold escalate into something more serious. This illness has truly taken a toll on me. End of this chapter. Chapter 844, The Belated Scrimgeour. The Death Eaters had never encountered such a situation before. Their previous identities were either high-ranking nobles or brutal dark wizards. When facing the vast majority of wizards, their mere presence would cause others to tremble and even wet themselves. Except for the resilient members of the Order of the Phoenix, no one dared to stand up to them. So, even though they had been imprisoned in Azkaban for over 10 years, their arrogance towards other wizards remained intact. This ingrained sense of superiority often translated into their battle tactics, making them assume the role of the aggressor. No matter who their enemy was, they always presumed their own strength. In their eyes, Anduin was merely an insidious and cunning individual who had taken advantage of the Dark Lord's weakened state to capture him. Seeing Anduin's youthful face only deepened this impression. Therefore, when Anduin struck them down with a single blow, killing their leader Rodolphus on the spot, The shock among the Death Eaters was far greater than expected. They had never encountered such a ferocious wizard, one even more ruthless and deadly than themselves. For a moment, many of them were paralyzed with fear. Run! Perhaps it was the complete shattering of their pride that led to their disarray. The Death Eaters, who had once been so disciplined, now panicked. A black-robed wizard yelled in despair and was the first to disapparate from the scene. His cry spurred the others into action, and they scrambled to use apparition to escape. They were genuinely terrified of Anduin, unable to even entertain the thought of continuing the fight. However, they did not forget Rodolphus's final order before his death, to take Boris away from the scene. Amidst the chaos, one person remained unfazed by Anduin's display of power, Bella, who was holding Umbridge hostage. "Ah!" Bella screamed in pain, but quickly grabbed the wand Rodolphus had left behind. She got up from the ground, still clutching Umbridge, and faced Anduin. "You bastard! Look at what you've done!" Bella glanced desperately at her husband's lifeless body at her feet, tears streaming down her face. The relationship between Bella and Rodolphus was complex. Although they were husband and wife in name, they often felt more like close colleagues or comrades. They shared an absolute devotion to the Death Eaters' cause and unwavering loyalty to Voldemort. Their personal relationship was further complicated by Bella's ambiguous feelings for Voldemort. Rodolphus was aware of this but felt no jealousy. Instead, he took pride in the fact that his wife served the Dark Lord, seeing it as an honor and a testament to his own closeness to Voldemort. Under such complicated emotions, Bella and Rodolphus had supported each other through years of imprisonment. Now, seeing her confidant and comrade lying dead at her feet, Bella's rage knew no bounds. She used Umbridge as a shield and fired several quick, hateful killing curses at Anduin, her malice evident in every spell. "Sorry, as a clean freak, I can't just sit and watch this rubbish dangle in front of me," Anduin retorted, not one to be outdone in harsh words. He casually deflected Bella's killing curses and contemplated whether to kill the unsightly figure before him. Although Bella used Umbridge as a shield, Anduin felt no hesitation. At worst, he would kill them both, and then framed Umbridge as an accomplice of the Death Eaters. But just as he was contemplating how to deal with Bellatrix, a sudden burst of air broke around him. It was Scrimgeour and the others who had arrived. Bellatrix, not being an idiot, immediately disappeared with Umbridge upon seeing reinforcements on Anduin's side. Anduin didn't stop her. He knew that without a leader, the Death Eaters would scatter and cause even more trouble. It was unfortunate that Rodolphus had been standing in such a precise spot, leading to his accidental death. Anduin hadn't lied earlier. It had indeed been a smooth kill. Reflecting on this, Anduin regretted not keeping Rodolphus alive. As Anduin was lost in thought, the aurors around him revealed themselves. One of the aurors, upon landing, immediately deployed the anti-apparition jammer and shielding jammer, a routine action from years of experience. However, most of them had caught a glimpse of the battle between Anduin and Bellatrix before landing. Some wizards even landed near the spot where Anduin had deflected the killing curse. Seeing Bellatrix escape and realizing that the team deploying the anti-apparition jammer had failed to stop her, Scrimgeour stomped his feet in frustration. "Damn it, I'm actually one step late." Scrimgeour had brought his team over immediately after receiving information from the headquarters dispatch center. But unlike Anduin, they couldn't pinpoint the Death Eater's location precisely. They had searched for a while upon arrival, but in that short time, the Death Eaters had slipped away. This infuriated Scrimgeour. "Sorry, I couldn't keep them all," Anduin said, putting on a regretful expression. "She had Umbridge in her hand, and I didn't dare to play hard for fear of hurting her." "No, Anduin, I didn't mean to blame you." Scrimgeour quickly waved his hands, worried that Anduin might misunderstand. "I'm angry with myself for not making it in time. Thank God you arrived at the scene quickly. The wizards who called the police are all right." Scrimgeour had come after receiving the automatic alarm from the little Billy Silver flash talisman, knowing that someone had encountered the Death Eaters earlier. "I told them to retreat first. They should be contactable through the dispatch center," Anduin said, still looking slightly regretful. "It's a pity I came in a hurry and didn't bring anti-apparition equipment. Otherwise, we wouldn't have let them escape so easily. Scrimgeour shook his head regretfully. He didn't doubt that Anduin could arrive faster than them. After all, he had shared the information about the Azkaban breakout with Anduin, considering it as the support they had requested. As the head instructor of the Aurors, it wasn't surprising that Anduin had discovered and rushed to the scene ahead of time. Letting the Death Eaters go was a bitter pill to swallow. Scrimgeour had received a report from Azkaban earlier. Learning that the escaped prisoners were all Death Eaters had put him on edge. He had been on the front lines against the Death Eaters and knew the extent of the damage they could cause. After a moment of reflection, Scrimgeour scanned the scene, ready to search for traces and continue the pursuit. But he was startled by what he saw. Was this what Anduin considered not being cruel? The sight of the 6 torn-apart corpses lay scattered on the ground. Scrimgeour and the surrounding Aurors couldn't help but swallow nervously. Scrimgeour was even more astonished when he recognized the decapitated leader as Rodolphus. According to Slim and the others, wasn't this guy the temporary leader of this group of Death Eaters? So he died? Isn't Anduin too ruthless? Anduin didn't bother to explain. He simply said, "Those Death Eaters just escaped from here. They are likely to continue south along the coastline. I will chase them now and see if I can block them. I'll leave this area to you." "Okay, no problem." Scrimgeour was overjoyed to hear that Anduin was going to continue helping and didn't hesitate to agree. "Well, if I find out about their movements, I will contact you as soon as possible. Also, lend me 2 jammers." Anduin requested, taking advantage of the opportunity to get 2 jammers from the other Aurors to prove his commitment to the chase. But only Anduin knew the truth. He had just learned from the map in his monocle that the Death Eaters had escaped quickly and urgently this time. After regrouping once, they rushed to the southern border of the United Kingdom without stopping, apparently preparing to venture across the English Channel. The shortest distance to France is more than 30 miles, but they could use apparition to cross directly. Why? In the past, it was a common route for smugglers. As long as the Aurors reacted and blocked that area, it would be very easy to catch them in time. Anduin planned to follow from a distance to ensure that they could escape from England smoothly. But soon, he could see that these Death Eaters were truly terrified. They fled without any hesitation or procrastination, as if they knew someone was chasing them. They even abandoned a Death Eater halfway. When Anduin arrived at the markers, he confirmed it was the guy whose palm he had accidentally cut off. The man had already died on the way. After inspection, Anduin confirmed that the other party had been executed. In their desperation to escape, these Death Eaters had started to eliminate any burdens within their group. This phenomenon showed just how scared they were at the moment. End of this chapter. Chapter 845, The Complicated Fudge. After escorting the Death Eaters out of the UK, Anduin lingered near the border to carefully observe their movements. The Death Eaters crossed the British-French border smoothly, as the border guards were not as strict as one might expect during peacetime. The Ministry of Magic was unaware of the fugitives' destination and was still contemplating their capture to mitigate the losses. Consequently, the prison escape remained a secret from the public, and the border had not been closed in time. Based on the tracker Anduin had placed, the Death Eaters had become fugitives, not lingering in France for long before fleeing eastward. A large number of Death Eaters have fled into Europe, which will inevitably cause widespread panic. It seems the business for the Silver Flash amulet will double again, Anduin mused, standing by the sea and gazing into the distance with a sly smile. The release of these Death Eaters was part of Anduin's plan from the beginning. It was driven by personal enmity and business interests. Azkaban would undoubtedly be blamed for such a significant oversight, giving Anduin the opportunity to infiltrate Silver Flash Trading Company's business into the prison. Moreover, the uncertainty surrounding the Death Eaters' movements would incite panic among the British and European populace, boosting sales of protective products and communicators from Silver Flash Commercial Bank. People had grown complacent, and wizards were generally conservative, lacking an immediate sense of crisis. This was evident from the sales ratio of Silver Flash Trading Company's protective products. Only 22% of the UK population had purchased related alchemy items. The 4 individuals who encountered Death Eaters in the bar earlier were fortunate to have silver flash amulets. Perhaps we can use little Billy and the others to spread the word, Anduin thought, his mind racing with possibilities. Convinced of the idea's merit, he discreetly contacted Rita Skeeter, instructing her to be on standby, and then calmly returned to the bar. Scrimger was still directing Aurors and Ministry of Magic employees to clean up the scene. Some Aurors had not been present earlier, likely sent out to maneuver or patrol. As the captain of the Auror Command, Scrimger's primary duty was to command and make judgments, so he hadn't arrived at the scene immediately. With advanced communication, timely pursuit was sufficient. The prolonged scene cleanup wasn't due to Anduin's excessive hacking of the Death Eaters. If they wanted to restore the scene quickly, a few spells might have sufficed. The delay was mainly to verify the bodies and conduct on-site autopsies for more information. Additionally, the Reversal of Accidental Magic Incident team had to manage the scene, erasing memories and restoring the environment, especially with many muggles around. When Anduin arrived, he found not only Scrimger, but also Minister of Magic Fudge and Director of the Department of Law Enforcement, Amelia Bones. They were questioning Billy, the survivor who had escaped earlier, outside the bar. Fudge's expression revealed his distress and frustration. "This is a jailbreak, and it's a Death Eater who escaped from prison. He escaped from Azkaban, which is known as the safest prison. Fudge still can't figure it out. How could such bad luck happen during his term of office? This is an indelible stain on his ministerial resume." At this meeting, Fudge's expression was a mix of anxiety and anger. He was furious and wished he could punish the prison guards on the spot. Amelia, on the other hand, remained relatively calm, communicating with the victims in a composed manner. Little Billy and the others were quite frightened, and she was trying to calm their emotions. When Anduin appeared, everyone present immediately turned their heads. "Mr. Wilson! Anduin! Anduin! How have you caught those fugitives?" Compared to the greetings from Billy Jr. and Scrimger, Fudge was obviously more anxious. Anduin shook his head lightly in the mirror and threw the dead Death Eater he found on the road in front of everyone. "Those guys seem to have escaped separately. I only found this one. I followed one of them all the way to the southern border. It seems they have crossed the border and fled abroad." Looking at the gradually pale corpse at their feet, both Scrimger and Amelia nodded slightly. Tracking someone through apparition is already very difficult. They didn't have much hope for Anduin's pursuit, but he managed to catch up and even had some success. This gave them a clearer understanding of Anduin's abilities. Fudge, however, was less concerned about the corpse. He approached Anduin with a slightly excited tone, asking expectantly, "Escaped from the country? Are all the prisoners gone?" He was mainly worried about Death Eaters wandering in the UK, which would not only cause local damage and increase risks, but also panic a large number of wizards. Fudge cared most about the Ministry of Magic and his personal reputation. If he didn't handle it well, it might jeopardize his ministerial status. Deep down, he hoped all the Death Eaters had gone abroad. Although this would be condemned by the international wizarding community, at least it wouldn't affect his local reputation. But Anduin had other plans. He intended to make a lot of money from these Death Eaters. "I don't know." Anduin shook his head solemnly. "I can only follow the clues left by those Death Eaters in the space. This is not an easy task, so it's difficult to determine the composition of the personnel from these traces. But I can be sure that Bella, who hijacked Umbridge, has definitely left the UK." Anduin's explanation was both reasonable and thorough. Neither Fudge nor the 2 officials from the Department of Law Enforcement could find any fault. To be honest, they had tried their best, and they themselves wouldn't have had the ability to do so. End of this chapter. Chapter 846, each with their own minds. Although Fudge was not entirely satisfied with the situation, he felt somewhat relieved to hear that Bella, the most notorious fugitive, was no longer in the UK. In Fudge's memory, Bella was the most vicious Death Eater besides Voldemort. During his tenure in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, he had frequently dealt with the chaos she caused, and had even received terrorist threats from her. Fudge frowned, pondering for a moment before giving the three people in front of him a questioning look. How do you think we should handle this matter next, especially in terms of publicity? Amelia and Scrimgeour exchanged glances, immediately guessing Fudge's intentions. Could it be that Fudge wanted to suppress this matter? No, he wasn't that foolish. There was no way this escape could be kept from the public. However, since Fudge was passing the problem to them, he definitely wanted to minimize any adverse effects on the Ministry of Magic, particularly on himself. Amelia and Scrimgeour were skilled in combat and command, but were less adept at handling propaganda. Therefore, they turned their attention to Anduin. They knew very well that although Anduin was not a member of the Ministry of Magic, he had significant influence over it, especially over Fudge. It was most appropriate for him to handle this, and he was known for his innovative ideas. Anduin quickly picked up on their hint and took the lead. Minister Fudge, this matter must not be kept secret. Of course, I know that, Fudge nodded resolutely. Although he valued fame and fortune, he wasn't so obsessed as to lose his mind. Not to mention the difficulty of concealing this matter, the unknown dangers it might bring to the wizarding community were unacceptable. Although Fudge was a politician, he was also a person with a basic conscience. His real concern was how to minimize the impact of this matter and manage the follow-up effectively. Understanding Fudge's concerns, Anduin calmly continued. First of all, we need to quickly announce the entire story of the prison break to the public. We don't know how many Death Eaters are still in the UK, so the wizarding community is at an unknown risk. We must warn them and remind everyone to contact the Ministry of Magic through the Silver Flash Amulet or Communicator as soon as they encounter danger. Yes, I understand that the sooner we announce it, the less adverse impact it will have on us. Additionally, we must communicate promptly with Muggle leaders, Fudge added, showing his understanding of the situation. However, he finally frowned and said, "But can we polish the press release a bit? At least make the Ministry of Magic look better." After going around in circles, Fudge finally revealed his true purpose. Having been the Minister of Magic for several years, he knew how to handle such a vicious incident. He had a plan in mind, but wanted to minimize the adverse effects caused by the prison break, and for that, he needed Anduin's help. The UK was no longer in the era of newspapers. The news of the magic projection was more three-dimensional, and the news reading function had recently been added to the communicator. To spread information to all wizards as quickly as possible, they couldn't bypass Anduin's Silver Flash firm. Not everyone had a newspaper at all times, but most wizarding families had at least one magic communicator, not to mention the magic projector, which was quite popular. Therefore, it might be an exaggeration to say that Anduin's influence was crucial, but it was certainly significant. Anduin now controls a significant portion of the entertainment and communication businesses in the UK. While it might be an exaggeration to say he controls all of them, his influence is undeniable. His relationship with the major newspapers, however, is strained. If any publicity is needed, communication with Anduin is essential. Fudge, not wanting to take the initiative, hoped to lure Anduin into speaking up. Anduin, fully aware of Fudge's tactics, didn't mind cooperating. After all, he would ultimately benefit from the arrangement. Finding a slightly embarrassed expression, Anduin said, "The impact of this incident is severe. We need to stabilize public sentiment." "Yes! Yes! Yes!" Fudge nodded eagerly, moving closer to Anduin with a sycophantic smile. "You're smarter than us. You must know the best way to handle this." Anduin gave Fudge a withering look. This man was shamelessly trying to pass the responsibility onto him, hoping to steer the situation in favor of the Ministry of Magic. Sighing inwardly, Anduin replied, "Since the reasons for the prisoner's escape are still unclear, let's characterize the incident as, after years of conspiracy, the Death Eaters collectively escaped from prison. Keep it as brief as possible." Fudge's eyes lit up at Anduin's suggestion. He understood that while the statement, "Death Eaters collectively escaped from prison," was true, the details of their methods and the duration of their planning were still unknown. Anduin's approach allowed them to frame the escape as a long-term conspiracy, avoiding the need to disclose the embarrassing failures of the Auror guards in Azkaban. By handling it this way, the Ministry of Magic could save face. The narrative would shift public focus away from the Ministry's shortcomings and onto the supposed long-term planning of the Death Eaters. Additionally, by not revealing the escape methods, they could argue that disclosing such information might pose future threats to Azkaban. What a genius idea! Fudge praised Anduin without hesitation. Anduin could only smile wryly, knowing that Fudge had likely been contemplating this idea for some time, but feared backlash if he proposed it himself. After silently venting his frustration, Anduin continued, "Upon hearing the news, the public will undoubtedly be concerned about Azkaban's security as well as their own safety. The Ministry of Magic must increase the guards at Azkaban immediately. We can't rely solely on the Dementors." "Of course," Amelia interjected. "I've already deployed 2 additional teams of Aurors to Azkaban and installed numerous monitors. I've just placed an order with Silver Flash Trading Company." Well, let me tell you, after this incident, Azkaban's security might no longer be reliable. This was a collective escape by more than a dozen wizards, clearly premeditated and exploiting a prison loophole, Scrimgeour complained. "It's easy to say," Fudge responded. "Once the investigation into the Death Eaters' escape is complete, if necessary, we can ask Anduin to reinforce Azkaban's security. That should reassure everyone." Fudge understood the importance of reciprocating favors, and he knew that involving Anduin would ultimately benefit the Ministry. Without waiting for Anduin to bring it up, Fudge took the initiative to mention it. The security contract for the entire Azkaban might not be as valuable as the one he made for the Ministry of Magic, but it would definitely not be lower than Gringotts. This was an income of tens of thousands of galleons. Anduin nodded noncommittally. Although he was very pleased, he maintained a composed and modest expression. "Since Azkaban has made arrangements, I will arrange for the videographer from the broadcasting company to go to the prison to pick up a mirror. Additionally, the 7 Death Eaters who were captured can also be publicized," Anduin said. Although the Death Eaters successfully escaped from Azkaban because the 4 wizards called the authorities immediately, the quick response from the Ministry of Magic, led by Scrimgeour's Striker team, arrived in time and prevented further murders, he continued. Fudge's smile widened upon hearing this. He hadn't expected Anduin to be so generous, even giving up the credit for rescuing the wizards. Scrimgeour, who was more honest, frowned in embarrassment. "You took care of those Death Eaters yourself, and we were clearly late." "No," Anduin shook his head. "Actually, I arrived just a minute before you. Your response was already very quick. If you can maintain such speed in future responses, combined with the protective gear on the wizards, you have every chance to save them." Hearing Anduin's comforting words, Scrimgeour bowed his head in shame. He knew Anduin was trying to console him. They had already learned from the 4 wizards that Anduin had saved them from a Vada Kedavra attack. Seeing this, Anduin realized that Scrimgeour's character couldn't accept such praise, so he took a step back and said, "Well, let's say that I arrived with you. I am a specially hired support from the Ministry of Magic, and we took down those Death Eaters together." Scrimgeour still felt a bit awkward, but Fudge immediately interrupted. "Let's arrange it like this. Anduin is just like one of our own, and whoever arrives first doesn't matter. After being hospitalized for almost half a month, I couldn't be cured. Yesterday, my family found a Chinese medicine clinic. I just found the clinic on the map. After 2 days of taking Chinese medicine, the effect was immediate. I am really speechless. Although the situation is still a little bit repetitive, the overall development is going in a good direction. Everyone, wait for me to be resurrected with full health." End of this chapter. Chapter 8 and 47. Buy it fast. Under Fudge's strong persuasion, Scrimgeour reluctantly accepted the proposal. Anduin then discussed the follow-up matters of the prison escape incident with several key figures, including the upcoming interviews, the patrol routes of the Aura Command, key alert areas, shifts, the security of important individuals, and even rewards. Both Amelia and Scrimgeour were highly professional commanders, and Fudge was a master of publicity, so it didn't take long for them to finalize a preliminary plan. Soon, the 4 of them harnessed their respective strengths and directed their subordinates to execute the plan. Due to the urgency of the situation, Everyone's efficiency was surprisingly high. It wasn't long before an emergency announcement about Azkaban spread throughout the British wizarding community. Newspapers, magic radios, magic broadcasts, and all other propaganda tools continuously broadcast the incident. Unsurprisingly, a large number of wizards were immediately panicked by the news. A dozen Death Eaters had escaped from Azkaban? If only one or two had escaped, people might have taken it as an anecdote, but more than a dozen escaping at the same time? Was their safety still guaranteed? Riots erupted in densely populated areas as people hurried home, fearing they might be attacked by Death Eaters if caught alone. The psychological shadow cast by those Death Eaters was unforgettable and couldn't be erased in just 10 years. During this period, some wizards tried to take advantage of the chaos. Some attempted to steal from shops, while others, black wizards who worshipped or had connections with the Death Eaters, sought to create further trouble. Fortunately, Anduin and Amelia had anticipated this and had already arranged for a large number of Ministry of Magic employees to maintain order in places like Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade Village before releasing the news. This ensured that no serious disturbances occurred, while also identifying, documenting, and even arresting those who tried to exploit the situation. Riots did start to appear for a while, especially in areas exposed to magic broadcasts, such as bars in gathering areas. The news was disseminated in a staggered manner, so people were initially shocked by the newscaster's announcement. As the details of the incident slowly unfolded, everyone gradually calmed down and understood the full story. It turns out that these Death Eaters were caught by Aurors and Mr. Wilson as soon as they escaped, and 7 of them were eliminated at once. I know little Billy who was attacked. When I lived in the north, I used to go to his bar a lot. He's not very good at casting spells. And he survived an attack by a dozen Death Eaters? Look at how happy he was during the interview, as if the attack never happened. It's the protective items from Silver Flash Trading Company that saved his life. Those protective accessories can not only activate a protective shield automatically in the face of magical attacks, but also immediately report to the Ministry of Magic after activation. It's brilliant. Yes, I bought one before, but because it has limited uses, my wife always complained about the expense, so I stopped wearing it after a few times. I didn't realize it was so effective. I need to put it on immediately. No wonder Mr. Wilson and the Aurors arrived so quickly. It was because of the alert. Doesn't this mean that as long as we have this kind of protective jewelry, we can be safe too? With these in our hands, we won't be afraid of the Death Eaters' attacks, right? Someone asked. Idiot. That thing can only protect against ordinary magic. It's useless against the unforgivable curses, another retorted. Still, it's better than being unarmed. I mean, would you feel confident facing those Death Eaters with just a wand in your hand? Gradually, the wizards calmed down as they learned more details. Discussions about the incident erupted. When many wizards discovered that nearly half of the Death Eaters had been captured, RTLE after escaping from prison, their fear diminished significantly. Some even began to gossip about the fugitives. Simultaneously, everyone was astonished by the Ministry of Magic's Aurors' swift response. Although many often criticized the Aurors, few had actually called them in emergencies. In the past, if someone lost something or a family member was in danger, the dispatch center employees would chat, understand, and confirm the situation before deploying the appropriate Auror. While the response time wasn't slow, it was within everyone's tolerance. But today, the Aurors demonstrated what it meant to be truly resolute. They acted immediately. As soon as the prison break occurred, the Ministry of Magic responded. The Death Eaters had barely 10 minutes of freedom before the Aurors blocked them. This significantly boosted everyone's trust in the Ministry and the reliability of the Aurors. More than a dozen Death Eaters escaped from prison and attacked a wizard gathering place, yet there were 0 casualties. The effort the Aurors put in was evident, and everyone couldn't help but admire them. Additionally, the experience of Billy and his friends amazed everyone. They managed to hold out until the Aurors arrived, relying solely on the Silver Flash amulet. To be honest, no one knew whether it was their luck or the quality of the amulet. After the key news was broadcast, Magic Radio aired interviews with Billy and his friends. They recounted their experience, further enhancing the Silver Flash amulet's reputation for safety. Many people began to believe that possessing a Silver Flash Trading Company protective amulet meant they were safe. With this in mind, some wizards took action. They slowly exited bars and coffee shops, rushing towards the Silver Flash Trading Company without looking back. Although the Aurors had thwarted the Death Eaters for now, a dozen were still at large. The radio mentioned that while some Death Eaters had left the UK, others' whereabouts were unknown. The Ministry of Magic even issued high rewards for their capture, indicating that danger still lurked. Thus, an idea formed in the minds of these wizards: quickly buy one, or even several, protective amulets to ensure their safety. After all, no one could guarantee they wouldn't accidentally encounter a Death Eater. Some even planned to buy extra amulets to sell at a high price later, anticipating a surge in demand. It seems there are always opportunists ready to profit, no matter the country. End of this chapter. Chapter 848. The Longbottoms. The entire British wizarding world was in an uproar due to the Azkaban prison break, and Anduin was no exception to the chaos. Between official dealings with the Ministry of Magic and the sudden surge in business at Silver Flash Trading Co., Limited, his time was stretched thin. In less than a day, the supply of protective amulets at Silver Flash trading firms across the country became scarce. Wizards, seemingly in a frenzy, were snatching up protective alchemy items in large quantities for personal use. Anduin understood the situation but wasn't overly concerned. He knew that playing the game of hoarding goods and raising prices wouldn't be easy against him. The first condition for making money as a scalper is limited production capacity from the seller. If Silver Flash talismans were ever in short supply, only then would these opportunists have a chance to hike prices. However, Anduin was confident in his ability to ramp up production. When the protective amulets were quickly bought out, he immediately instructed the alchemy factory to operate at full capacity to produce more. There was no such thing as too many of these props at the moment. If they couldn't be sold domestically, they could always be exported. The news hadn't fully spread yet, but the amulet business abroad was expected to boom soon. After a long day, it was late at night when Anduin finally returned to his residence. To his surprise, he found Harry and Sirius waiting for him. "Huh? Why are you two here?" Anduin asked, puzzled. Although Sirius's home fireplace was directly connected to his, they usually contacted him via communicator first, especially at such a late hour. "Isn't it because of the mess you caused?" Sirius rolled his eyes. He knew a lot about the situation and was aware that Anduin had a hand in the Death Eater's prison break. His words were cryptic, but Harry didn't catch on. Harry took the initiative to explain. "Uncle Wilson, we just heard about the Death Eaters escaping from prison. Shortly after, a group of Aurors came to our door. They said that since my godfather and I are involved with the Death Eaters, it's very likely we'll be targeted for retaliation. So, they insisted on monitoring and protecting us around the clock." Anduin nodded slightly. He was aware of this. During discussions with Fudge and others, the protection of Death Eater enemies was a priority. The current wizarding world had too many people with grievances against the Death Eaters. Members of the Order of the Phoenix, in particular, were prime targets for eradication. Amelia had suggested providing protection for these individuals and leaders of the Muggle world. Of course, the level of protection varied. Wizards or families with old grudges against the Death Eaters were simply reminded to be cautious. Those who had faced the Death Eaters head-on or fought against them were given more practical help and suggestions, such as living together or receiving protective equipment from the Ministry of Magic for self-defense. Harry and Sirius, with their blood feuds against the Death Eaters, were a top priority. Close protection was the minimum. After Harry returned to school, a standing guard might even be deployed outside the school. "Those Aurors are really annoying," Sirius grumbled impatiently. "It's just some Death Eaters. It's not like I haven't fought them before. Do you really think I'm still afraid of them?" Sirius retorted, his tone dripping with disdain. Anduin glanced at Sirius, slightly exasperated, then turned his attention to Harry. "So, and then, you haven't explained clearly why you're here." Harry, with a hint of a sneer, explained, "It's just that my godfather thinks those aurors are annoying. He wanted to drive them away, but they refused to leave. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore and compromised, saying that for the rest of the summer vacation, he would move with me to your place. Only then did the aurors agree to back off." Uncle Wilson. Harry's eyes lit up with excitement. "I didn't expect men tying your name would be so effective. When those aurors heard we would stay with you, they immediately felt relieved, but they insisted on seeing us arrive here before they would leave." "So that's how it is." Anduin nodded in understanding. But soon, Sirius spoke up again, his voice tinged with arrogance. "I just took Harry to hide from the aurors. I'll take him back tomorrow, so I won't cause you any trouble." "Should I thank you for that?" Anduin rolled his eyes, then shook his head. "Forget it. After those Death Eaters escaped, there might be chaos outside for a while. Living alone at number 12 Grimald Place isn't safe enough. You should just move here." "Not safe?" Sirius frowned. He knew Anduin well enough to understand that if he had released those Death Eaters, he wouldn't let them cause trouble. But now, Anduin's words suggested otherwise. "Are you referring to those Death Eaters lurking in the dark?" Sirius quickly caught on, realizing Anduin wasn't just talking about the escapees. "Yes, and also those families who still secretly support Voldemort," Anduin explained. "I'm planning to use these Death Eaters to catch more of them. I can't let them go." "And it's not just you," Anduin continued, anticipating Sirius's reluctance. "I plan to call the Longbottom family too. You haven't seen Augusta in a long time, right?" "Will Neville move here too?" "Yes!" Harry's eyes widened with excitement. Seeing this, Sirius couldn't bring himself to refuse and nodded in agreement. The next day, when the Longbottom family emerged from the fireplace, Sirius's eyes widened in surprise. "Frank? Alice? You?" It turned out that the Longbottoms who appeared were not just Augusta and Neville, but also two middle-aged couples, Frank and Alice Longbottom, who had been missing for a long time. Despite their gray hair and slightly weathered faces, they looked remarkably normal, their eyes clear and calm. "Blake, long time no see," Frank greeted his old friend with a joyful smile. "Alice and I were discharged from the hospital 2 days ago. I originally told my mother not to inform you, to give you a surprise. I didn't expect the opportunity to come so soon. I started to have a high fever again. The Chinese medicine doctor said this is a normal reaction after pulling out the cold. I don't know if it's true or not, but my health has indeed been better while drinking Chinese medicine than when I was in the hospital. However, I've been dizzy for the past 2 days and can't type at all." End of this chapter. Chapter 849, A Joyous Reunion. Sirius stared straight into their eyes, his face lighting up with surprise. "It's as surprising as seeing Harry again. I love such surprises." He ran towards them like an excited child and enveloped them in a tight embrace. On the other side, Harry saw the Longbottoms for the first time. He didn't know their identities, but judging from Sirius's reaction and their resemblance to Neville's grandparents, he could make an educated guess. To avoid any awkwardness from misidentifying them, Harry moved closer to Neville and asked cautiously, "Are these two your?" "Yes," Neville's eyes sparkled with joy. "They are my father and mother." "Oh, why haven't you mentioned them before?" Harry asked, puzzled. As Neville's best friends, he and Ron often shared their family stories. Even though Harry's parents were long gone, he never shied away from the topic. But Neville had never talked about his parents, often mentioning his grandmother Augusta instead. Harry had assumed Neville's parents had passed away, like his own. It turned out they were still alive. "It's a long story," Neville said with a wry smile. "My parents were aurors during the war. They were severely injured by Death Eaters, which left them unconscious. They've been at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries for treatment ever since." "I see," Harry nodded, understanding dawning on him. No wonder the Longbottoms looked more haggard than Sirius, who had been imprisoned in Azkaban. Their condition was more serious due to their injuries. "So your parents are finally recovering now?" Harry asked curiously. "Yeah," Neville nodded enthusiastically. "It's all thanks to Uncle Wilson. My parents' illnesses were very complicated. If it weren't for Uncle Wilson, who has been searching for ways to treat them over the past 10 years, they wouldn't have recovered so easily. Actually, My uncle's treatment for my parents has lasted for several years. They fully recovered only 2 days ago. I didn't expect to bring them home so quickly, Neville said, his voice full of joy and excitement. The Longbottoms had always been a significant burden on his heart. The disaster his parents suffered had made him introverted and timid. Fortunately, Anduin's timely intervention a few years ago gave the Longbottoms hope for a cure. This allowed Neville's mentality to gradually open up, preventing him from sinking into despair after entering school. Now that his parents had fully recovered, it was as if Neville had suddenly become sober, and his entire mental outlook had changed. Harry noticed the change in Neville and became more curious about the Longbottoms. Soon, Sirius, Frank, and Alice finished reminiscing and introduced Harry to them. When the Longbottoms saw Harry, their expressions were filled with emotion. Because of Harry's relationship with Neville, they and the Potters had been like family back then. Seeing their old friend's son after so many years was inevitably bittersweet. "Harry, you've suffered for so many years. Don't worry, we will be your family, just like Sirius," Frank said. Although his hair was gray and he looked weathered, his eyes were bright and clear, showing that the negative effects of the Cruciatus curse had been completely eliminated. "Thank you, Mr. Longbottom," Harry said, feeling a warmth spread through him at Frank's words. Sirius felt warmth in his heart. Afterward, he led the Longbottom family to settle in the manor. When Anduin returned from his business, they exchanged pleasantries. With the Longbottoms around, Sirius stopped clamoring to go back and spent every day reminiscing with Frank and Alice about their past. They often mentioned the Potters and Anduin during these conversations. Taking this opportunity, Harry and Neville learned a lot about their family's glorious pasts. They discovered that the Longbottoms and the Potters had fought side by side many years ago. Even in their youth, they had faced thrilling and dangerous crises, with Anduin often present. For safety reasons, Sirius and the Longbottom family stayed with Anduin for a long time. Perhaps due to the lack of a childhood relationship with Neville, the Longbottoms spent a lot of time with him, which made Harry feel a bit envious. During this period, the two former Aurors also gave advice on Neville and Harry's magical studies. This harmonious life continued until the eve of the start of Hogwarts. Despite their reluctance, the Longbottoms had to send Neville and Harry to King's Cross Station. This year, Neville was not as eager to return to school as in previous years, clearly finding it hard to part from his parents. However, once reunited with Ron and Hermione on the train, his sadness was somewhat alleviated. "Hey, have you heard? There seems to be a big change at the school this year," Ron exclaimed impatiently as soon as they were all together. "Big changes? Is it related to those fugitives? Is the Ministry of Magic going to deploy guards around the school?" Hermione asked, more excited than the others, as this was her first experience with such situations in the wizarding world. "No," Ron shook his head. "My dad said that Hogwarts has a security system arranged by Uncle Wilson, so there's no need for the Ministry of Magic to worry about security. I'm talking about exchange students." "Exchange students?" The other three's eyes widened in surprise. This was the first time they had heard the news. Although Harry and Neville lived with Anduin, he was usually very busy and rarely appeared before them. "That's right," Ron said proudly, raising his chin. "Percy joined the student council this year and became the president. He told me that a group of students from other wizarding schools will be attending classes and living with us at Hogwarts. Some time ago, I had a severe relapse of my illness, and I felt very uncomfortable. I originally wanted to be hospitalized again, but the Chinese medicine doctor said that this relapse was a normal reaction. The reason for such a severe reaction was my previous poor living habits. After following his advice and focusing on self-care for a period of time, my body has indeed recovered a lot, but I am still not fully well. I have to continue drinking Chinese medicine and resting. I apologize for any delays during this time. The main reason is that I was too unwell to even get out of bed. It was very painful." End of this chapter.